All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Megan Kavinsky. I am the CEO of Point to Point, and I am super excited to be here today with Nik Werk. Nik?
Thank you, Megan. My name is Nik. I'm the founder of Werk Insight. We're a B2B market research company. And over the years, I focused on building materials, so specification, construction, and been able to work with more than 20 building product manufacturers. So happy to share a little bit about what we're hearing and what we've seen.
And Point to Point and Nik, we've been partnering together for a long time. So we've had an opportunity to have a lot of different discussions about what it's like to be in the building materials space, where we see the industry headed. So when we were thinking about doing a trends conversation, Nik was a natural guest for us to invite to be a part of our webinar series. But talking about trends in building materials, it's not exactly like the trendiest of industries, right? But I do think that it's a really interesting and an exciting time to be in our industry, because from our vantage point and what we're seeing is we really are seeing a lot more innovation going on, innovation in new products, innovation in new markets and go-to-market strategies, and feels like the industry is starting to get a little bit more pace and catch up quite a bit to where some other industries have already been. So I'm curious, Nik, are you having a similar experience? Does it feel different from your vantage point? What's your point of view about where we are?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, traditionally, we've seen that building product manufacturers are quite sales driven, right? What gets prioritized, what gets funded is usually a lot based on existing customers and channel relationships and so on. We've seen that innovation tends to be very product driven, right? It's incremental improvements, it's line extensions for the most part. I think the reason is traditionally, and for a long time, we would usually hear that when a new product came out, it's because the plant found a way to make it lighter or make it thicker. And then they would go to marketing and say, hey, where is the opportunity for this, rather than marketing spotting an opportunity and then developing solutions to meet it. But I agree. I mean, we've seen really significant shifts. I feel like more manufacturers are getting better at driving, especially product innovation based more on the needs of the market, the viability, the willingness to pay. Senior leadership are already used to giving R&D or product teams 3, 5, even 10-year roadmaps for developing new solutions, but we're increasingly seeing them be deliberate about building in time to research and understand the right opportunity beforehand. And the other area I would say is we've seen a lot of improvement in digital delivery. We see a lot of UX work being done. Manufacturer websites are still a pain point for some professional audiences, but the usability is getting much, much better, and we're seeing those investments pay off as well.
Yeah, I love the stat about the amount of time that people get for R&D for product development, because from our vantage point, we always talk about how you spend, however many years and millions of dollars in R&D, and then it seems to be like you get the final 30 days where people start thinking about the go-to-market strategy. So I will share a fun fact, which is 95% of all new product launches fail. And the number one reason why is that you fail to create a marketing strategy for it. So while we're talking about time on the front end to really get voice of customer, I'd be remiss if I didn't advocate for some time on the back end or working ahead a little bit from a marketing standpoint.
Completely agree, yeah.
Yep. So one of the things that you mentioned, and one of the topics that we want to address today is really following the money. And in this case, the money is coming from the government. It's coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. And whether your product already met the requirements or you're innovating new products to meet the requirements of the IRA, I do think this is driving a lot of innovation in our industry. So it's the first piece of U.S. legislation that's supporting complete fossil fuel phase out. And for those that aren't aware, which I'm going to guess most of you are, but in case you're not, if you increase your energy efficiency by 25%, you get the deduction. And so and you get the deduction through a tax credit, or just a deduction in the investment. So it has to be for clean electricity, energy efficiency, electrified buildings, electric vehicles. And I know, Nik, you've been doing a lot of work with different manufacturers, because this is confusing. The government has not put out a lot of great, very clarifying information about how you take advantage of this. So a lot of manufacturers are doing due diligence on their own and coming up with creative ways that they're leveraging this as differentiators. So what are you seeing in your work? What is the IRA doing to help manufacturers?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there about the lack of clarity. You know, the
Mhm.
IRA was signed into law over a year ago. Many of the tax breaks and incentives that we either introduced or extended, you know, they came into force this year. But what's had to happen over the year is we've got more clarity about who stands to benefit from these. So it's only just over 2 months ago that the EPA announced 100 million grant for EPDs, which can benefit manufacturers who want to develop sustainability information. And I would say right now is a prime opportunity and a lot of upside to being very deliberate about what sustainability information you produce and how you disseminate it, because it's a really big deal for the clients of building product manufacturers, right? So to give you one example, one of the things the IRA did was not introduce, but extend and improve the 179D credit. So what that is if you're a GC, if you're a designer, if you're a builder, you can claim back in tax savings up to $5 per square foot if you have a fully qualified building. So imagine if you're building colleges, universities, if you're renovating churches, that adds up like really, really quickly. The other one we've seen a lot of talk and opportunity about is called 45L. And that's a credit if you're building or renovating homes. But if you're a Pulte, right, or you're a D.R. Horton, or you're selling to these guys that are putting up subdivisions and houses all across the country, those kinds of companies, they will have procurement negotiate with manufacturers for less than $10 a home. That is still worth their time with the margins that they're working on. Here we're talking about claiming back $5,000 per home for energy efficiency standards that many are telling us are not actually that hard to meet with existing products. So it's a really, really big deal for a lot of manufacturers right now.
Mm-hmm. So if you're a manufacturer, are you saying that the expectation is that you would be helping your customers, your contractors, the channel, figure out how they can use these incentives to price your products more aggressively to differentiate you from the competition? Is that the basic sense of what a manufacturer would do, assuming that your products help get to the code requirements?
That's exactly what they should have been doing. What we've seen is really a division between manufacturers that were very proactive and deliberate, and ones that were not. So most manufacturers in the spaces like enclosure, insulation, those kind of things that would really affect the energy efficiency side of things, they almost all had some kind of campaign that said, hey, you know, our rigid board insulation qualifies for this credit. Homeowners go use us, or pro tradesmen go use us. We didn't see that be that effective. What we saw was the minority that went beyond and said, well, this is exactly the kind of credits that you would qualify for. This is where you go about claiming them. This is how they work. There was very little of that, but the bid we saw was extremely effective because a lot of these, whether they're installers or GCs, you know, they're probably not legal scholars. So they need that little bit of extra hand-holding, not just being told that your XPS is also qualifying for those kind of efficiencies.
Yeah, I do think that the insulation industry on the whole has really gotten their act together on this. And part of the visibility that I have is from one of our clients, which is the North America Insulation Manufacturers Association, the voice of fiberglass and mineral wool on Capitol Hill. But they put together a website called insulationincentive.org that really helps pull together this information, at least the federal level information, so that it's easier and you can identify by audience, like I'm a contractor, I'm a manufacturer, I'm a homeowner, and understand what you need to do. And I do know that's where a lot of the members of, a lot of the insulation companies have been able to pull on that for information to feed, well, one, internal knowledge of how you take advantage of this, and then also using that to get alignment on claims or messaging that they can put out into the marketplace too. So if you haven't checked out, I'm sure most of the people who are on this call, you guys are a part of some sort of trade association. And if your products do qualify, have, something that could help with these energy certifications, I would encourage you to talk to the trade association and see what they're doing to help members understand and take advantage of that you could then bring internally to help inform your marketing efforts. It would be a great place to start if you're not doing something already. But all this talk about sustainability, Nick, or about energy efficiency, it has me thinking about sustainability. So I want to start talking a little bit more about energy efficiency and the money, that's great. But at the end of the day, we are trying to figure out how we stop warming up the earth, right? And the building materials industry is a big contributor overall. And so sustainability in our market, it really does have a lot of meaning and a lot of importance. So what's been interesting is that I feel like this past year is when sustainability really started to become real. Like there was a lot of green products before, there were a lot of different opportunities that were out there, but I didn't always feel like organizations were as committed to it, consumers were as willing to pay for it. But this year we saw sustainability really become more of a differentiator and a wedge and a way to get consumers' attention differently in the market and respond and get product adoption along with it. So again, are you seeing similar things on your end? Is this just more of our point of view because we do a lot of work in new product launches? Like what are you seeing?
Yeah, we see very similar things, and I think a lot of this, especially on the commercial side or just larger project size, will start with the architect. And one of the things we see from a lot of the great work that organizations like the AA publish frequently is consistently a significant majority of architects, they want sustainable solutions. They want to use more sustainable solutions. I think what we have seen start to change, though, is beyond that being a nice to have and something you care about personally, actually being willing to have conversations with clients if this involves more money to the point you just raised, or just explaining the why. We are also seeing more adoption and willingness when we track specs all the way to the GC and installer level. We are seeing more success with sustainable products in general. I think the biggest hurdle we see is simply just the confusion about what sustainability is, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can define sustainability, that you can document it. And when you think, again, about the architects, because a lot of this will start with them, right? They might not necessarily know which certifications or which performance criteria mean that you have a sustainable high performance coating versus sustainable fiberglass insulation or whatever it might be, right? There are so many different both project certifications like LEED, but also product certifications like Declare or Green Guard, and they don't necessarily know which ones to refer to. When we've dug into that, we found as well, it's not just at the individual architect level. What we find is even in the larger firms and medium-sized firms that do a lot more of these larger projects, they don't have consistent guidelines. They don't have consistent processes for how do we define a sustainable product as a company and how do we make sure that's replicated. So it becomes very difficult, even with the intent and the willingness to pay that you're talking about. There's still a lot of hurdles in terms of the information gap.
Yeah. Well, and on that, you made a comment when we were talking about the IRA about EPDs. So I do think EPDs are a place where you could start to aggregate more of the information together, but I'm going to guess a lot of people don't know what an EPD is. So can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm no expert in EPDs, but at a high level, it's an environmental product declaration, and they're nothing new. They've been around for a really long time. What's happened is they've gained more attention. The idea is basically, and funding, as we just talked about, sorry, but the idea is generally, instead of having your sustainability information for different certifications, different performance criteria, all the different things you might have to say about the sustainability and how your product was made, you collate that all in one big file. And some of these are easily 50 pages long. But what we find is that when a specifier or a GC or an engineer needs to find out about a product, they much prefer having everything in one place and then searching that file instead of collating it across different ones. So they're really growing in usage and adoption, especially from larger manufacturers. And we are seeing them being used a lot more by all manner of trades, both the architects, the engineers, and the GCs.
Mm-hmm. And there was another comment that you made in there about, what testing are people using? And I was remiss when I started this. I didn't say, if you guys have questions as we're going through this, please put them in the chat. We would love to, be able to answer any specific questions or concerns or elaborate further for anyone that's in attendance. And also, if you want to put in the chat the testing and certifications that you are using from a sustainable standpoint, so there can be some information sharing among the attendees as well. One of the things that goes along with this and the confusion of all of it is I think you have especially for publicly traded companies, you have, sustainability reports like ESG reports, and then you have product level claims, and then you have architects that need project level data and information, and so you're dealing with like such different lenses and ways at looking at all of the same information and data and having to parse it out depending on the audience and who it's going after. So I think when you're doing the product level testing, you need to be prepared to think about how you can translate it to the project level in order to get that adoption. Like just doing the product level isn't enough if you're trying to sell to a specified audience. And I know Nick talked a lot about, the architect or more of the specification side of our business. I would say from the more of the installer side or the big box, distribution side to it, that you see Home Depot, Lowe's, Grainger, Menards, all of them, but especially the publicly traded ones, and in particular Home Depot, have very large ESG commitments and reports and things that they're being held accountable to from their investor group. And this is they're working hard. If you want to get the attention of a merchant at Home Depot in a different way, lead with your sustainable products, lead with what's new and what they can expect, because that's what they're trying to get in the aisle is our products that have more sustainability benefits to them as a way to draw contractors, consumers, all of their customers in the front door. So, and all these themes that we're talking about sort of overlap with one another, because when you're talking about, the IRA and information and it's all over the place, you're talking about sustainability and information, it's all over the place. In our industry, information is all over the place, and there is a persistent, what we're calling information gap that exists between what your intended audience and what the manufacturer is providing. Like we have so many audiences in this industry, it's crazy. They all need variations of the same information, but in a slightly different way, or deeper here than you need it over here. And it can be very challenging as a manufacturer to keep up with all the different content that you need to create. So this has been a lot of Nick's focus is like, what kind of content specifically on the architectural side? Like, what are people looking for? How well are we doing as an industry? What do you see? Where are we in this, Nick? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Where do we stand?
We are keeping up, I would say, as an industry. The answer to what they're looking for is, unfortunately, as many manufacturers, especially in marketing or digital product roles, will have found, is the needle in the haystack. One day, one architect is looking for a really, really specific ASTM air leakage score to see if it qualifies for something very specific to the client. The next day, they want to download a BIM object, or the next day it's just comparing R value across things. It's so hard to predict what they're after, and those specifics are really, really important, especially to the specifiers and architects who do look at this kind of information before the other audiences do, and very often determine what product is going to be under consideration, right? The answer is very much about not so much trying to limit to the most important information. We've seen manufacturers who try to do that, to say, well, the problem is we're telling them 200 different things about our portfolio, and our portfolio has hundreds of products with configurations. So they said, let's just boil it down to the top 15, top 12. The problem was it very quickly starts to not work, because for one reason or another, often sustainability or compliance, they need something super specific. So it's not about limiting the information, it's about limiting how you pass it out. So if you can have fewer files that cover all your products, like instead of having a lot of sustainability information across files, have an EPD that's comprehensive. Instead of having safety data sheets, product descriptions, have a general product description or downloadable spec that people can refer to. It's usually about that, making it easier to find and having fewer files without necessarily limiting the number of words, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, is that what you would consider table stakes, like the EPD and the product technical data, 3-part spec? Like, what do you think if you're thinking of, launching a new product, or you want to make sure you have all the right content across your portfolio? Like, what are the foundational elements that it's like, if you can't get this together, just stay home?
I think those two are exactly right. The one I would add is BIM. I think many manufacturers will have caught on to this. it's not just architects. So BIM, obviously, we understand why architects or specifiers would use it. It's used in the model to ultimately realize the design. But we're seeing a lot of GCs, large builders, use this kind of stuff as well to quite a sophisticated level. It's driven by predominantly, I would say, younger professionals. I should say in our industry, building products, younger might mean a little bit older than it might in other industries. So, I don't want to age anyone, but sort of usually in this kind of data, younger means 45 or younger. So it's not just kids coming out of college. People are really used to using these files much later in their career. So I think that's a really important focus area. BIM grows every single year in usage and sophistication as well, the kind of things you can do with a BIM file. To your prior point about how we're doing, we have kept track of general satisfaction levels. I've had the pleasure of working with the AIA since 2016, and if I only refer publicly available data, I can still say that unfortunately what it shows is in that time we've not improved satisfaction with the way we as manufacturers provide information. Now, that's not because we haven't gotten worse, it's just expectations have risen quite a lot with a lot of these digital developments, and I would say at best we're keeping up. So yes, it's table stakes, but a lot of the time manufacturers still, for very good reason, struggle to get it right with such many pieces of information for so many products.
Yeah, I do think, with like we talked about in the beginning, there's been a lot of innovation, new product advancements. There's a lot of move towards systemization, or at least better understanding the integration between different material types, even if they're not all a part of your solution. And so as the industry gets significantly more technical and continues to have higher standards, like the amount of documentation that you need to provide to support that, or the level of systems integration that you need to be able to understand, is increasingly complex. So, I just think that, as an industry, even to tread water with where we are, it's sort of formidable at the moment with the way that things are headed.
Absolutely, I agree.
I want to check the chat real quick and see if we have any questions in the chat, or if this motivates anyone to put a question in the chat, feel free, because I certainly have more questions, but I would love to have an opportunity to have our audience ask anything. All right, I'm going to ask one, and that doesn't mean that you don't have to, guys. So let's talk about, let me see here. All right, here's a good one. Are CEs dead, or are CEs alive? I feel like every year you see conflicting headlines, like the CEU is dead, or the CEU is integral, and new life. What is happening here? Why do we see all these different headlines?
I would say, firmly grounded in data, continuing education is as alive and kicking as it's ever been. A lot of manufacturers are missing that opportunity. So the ones that are saying that it's dead might just be missing out on probably the most effective way that you can get in front of decision makers, partly because they have to. If you do accredited CE, that is part of being a professional in this industry, certainly for roles like architects. So they need to take it. What we see consistently is one of the most common ways that architects learn about new manufacturers, new opportunities, new ways to do design, and to some extent products, although without getting too technical, there are limitations to what you can and cannot say in an accredited CE course. But what we see a lot as well that tells me that this has momentum is again, it's the younger professionals that are driving this change a lot of the time. We see the folks that were sad to see lunch and learns go in the office, the folks that were sad to see CE being deprioritized by manufacturers. With them, they do have more to learn. This is an incredibly technical industry where one day you're designing doors and entryways, the other one you're designing a roof or a vapor barrier that can't break, and it's really difficult stuff. And what we see consistently is just that willingness and necessity of learning. So the manufacturers that sort of scaled back since the pandemic, both in terms of face-to-face and investment, we think they're at a disadvantage. We see continuing education being one of the most effective ways you can engage with, especially architects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another thing that I personally believe in CEs is that just in general, not a big fan of gated content across the board, especially for the specification audience, but I mean, really for anyone. And a CE, though, by nature has to be gated. A CE requires you to be able to disclose your information so that you can get credit for taking the course, to maintain your licensure. So I think that the CEs also are a great source of lead generation. Manufacturers that are doing well with them are following up with a PK, with a product knowledge session, and using it to expand their reach within different architectural firms. Like, to me, the CE is a no-brainer. Like, CEs and samples, people should give their information to receive those, right? But beyond that, very hard to justify gated content. There's just so much dang content that is out there. Anything that you would do to create friction between someone who's that highly intended to get information about your product and giving them that information, I would not recommend putting the barrier up there. So that is my point of view.
And I would echo that a lot, Megan. I mean, we see architects and others are very, very pressed for time. If you make it hard to find information, they are, unless they're absolutely devoted to your materials, which we don't always see that much, they will just go find it from a competitor who does have that EPD or that BIM object more handy. So we think it comes at a really high cost to try and get that content, and we don't think that the trade-off is worth it in most cases.
So one last thought, and then we'll conclude here. The role of the rep, as manufacturers have to create all this content, do these CEs, some of which you can do on demand, some of which require. I mean, I personally, and it is really hard. I mean, we've seen through both recessions, the more recent one and the one back in 2008, that for manufacturers in particular, that it's very hard to maintain a strong rep force. There's a lot more turnover. The products are more technical. The relationships in this industry have not been super well documented in a CRM, although that is improving. Is very difficult for reps to come in and take over some of those relationships and provide that same level of guidance. Do you agree? Disagree? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the reps are, by their very nature, they are how you have a relationship with a manufacturer and their brand. They do a lot of the hard work right now. When we talked about architects not necessarily understanding, or this could be a GC as well, not understanding how to define something sustainable for a particular thing, they probably are more likely, most of them anyway, to call a rep and find a rep to do that work for them than they are to try and find it on the website for a prolonged period of time. They're also the ones that solve technical challenges. So the most common reason, and again, humility aside, we've worked with maybe 20 different building product manufacturers over the last 3-4 years, and we see again and again that the rep is the reason why people come back to us, where the relationship sits. So a lot of them have struggled with a move to a more virtual world. We do see reps getting fewer and further between, but the ones that stay are really, really important to their businesses.
Yeah, I think a good rep force, time and time again, I hear from architectural firms that, a good rep force, like someone who knows the product, is like the best thing for them. Or also even from a dealer or a contractor, like, their number one complaint is, I'm educating the rep on their own product, or now they've helped us before, so I think that is such an important part of the relationship. And even though we're moving to a human, or a less human world, and, more access to content and information, at the end of the day, that human element, it has to be the differentiator and has to be what's solving the complex problems that our industry faces. So thank you, Nik. I really do appreciate you joining today, and I appreciate all of you joining us today. I hope everyone who's attending has a great holiday season. We'll be back in January with our webinar series again. We're going to be starting and featuring one of Point to Point's clients, W&W Glass. They're going to be talking about an exciting new product launch they did and how they're looking to disrupt their industry. So thanks, everyone. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.